Welcome to the Emerging Civil War Podcast. I'm Chris Mackowski, and I'm excited to have some guests today from across the proverbial pond. Greg Bayne and Mike Somerville are with the UK Civil War Roundtable. How are you guys doing today?
Very great,
Thank you
Chris.
very much.
So I appreciate both of you taking the time to chat with us. And the reason I wanted to have you guys on is because, when I was over there visiting your conference last year, I had such an extraordinary time. And it was just a delightful experience in all the right ways. And I came back and people were like, what? You mean there's a Civil War roundtable for the U.S. Civil War in England? Well, yes, indeed. So I wanted to bring you guys on to crow a little bit about the fantastic work you do. Mike, you're president, so let me start with you. Just tell me a little bit about what the roundtable is and what you guys do.
Well, I guess we're sort of like all other roundtables, in that we're a bunch of people who are fascinated and interested in the Civil War, from various different origins, I guess. I mean, we have a few people who come to it through reenactments, and we've got some people who do reenactments of the Civil War over here in the UK. We've got a few people who come to it from wargaming. We've got a few people who actually have ancestors who fought in the Civil War and have come to it through genealogy route. But I think most people are just interested because it's such a fascinating conflict to study. It's, from my point of view, the technology and the tactics are just changing at the time. And then you've got such a wonderful range of characters. And we've got a really knowledgeable group. I suppose we focus a little bit on British involvement in the war, whether that be the people who fought, the politics of the Anglo-American relationship. But we've also got people who are just interested in the battles and in the campaigns. And we've got a very knowledgeable group here, I would say.
Yeah. And Greg, you told me that the roundtable is actually pretty old. It's been around for a while.
That's right. It started in 1953, of all places, in Portsmouth University. And in fact, we've got one of the founding members is still alive, Mike Barrett, and he still makes an appearance every now and again at our meetings in London. So we think we're about the fifth oldest roundtable.
Yeah.
So we're quite pleased with that.
And one of the things that I found pretty fascinating when I was there, Mike, you'd mentioned a second ago, pretty knowledgeable group. I found you guys to be exceptionally knowledgeable. It wasn't like a passing curiosity. You guys really knew your stuff. Tell me a little bit more about that, because you guys have plenty of history over there, and you guys are really like neck deep in the American Civil War.
Well, I suppose if you're in Britain and you're interested in the Civil War, it has to be a passion. I don't want to disrespect people in America because you've obviously got your own relationships to the conflict, which are much more intense in some respects than ours. But if you're interested in the Civil War in this country, you have to be quite involved. If you're going to go and visit battlefields over in the States, putting it bluntly, it costs a little bit of money. So you've got to, you've got to be fairly dedicated to really get involved on a serious level. But we accept people with all levels of interest. But the core of our membership, I think, are they're people who are very, very devoted to the subject and spend a lot of time reading and indeed visiting the battlefields in the States. And because of that, we've built up a huge network of people like yourself now over in America. And a lot of those people, as Greg explained in regards to our Crossfire magazine, they are great contributors to our group. We think we've got a really great ecosystem there.
Yeah. Greg, I see you nodding along with what Mike is saying there. You want to chime in? Yeah.
Well, I think it's like once you're in, and once we get hold of you, you tend to stay because I want to say we're hard drinking, but we're not hard drinking. But we just like each other's company, and hail fellow, well met, and some meetings, it doesn't matter who's talking or what the thing is. It's just the camaraderie of our little group, as we say. So yeah.
And Greg, how do you guys manage the logistics of getting together?
Well, we have a schedule. We try and we ask for volunteer speakers, whether it's members or anybody that's passing, the UK, flying in and flying on type thing. If they let us know, we'll try and fit a meeting around them. We have Zoom meetings, which Mike introduced during COVID, which have been a godsend. So you don't have to travel here to do that. Gary Gallagher was the last speaker, and that was an excellent talk. But I'll leave Mike to talk about the conferences. But the day-to-day, so the month-to-month meetings, just fantastic experiences, really. Okay, over to you, Mike, for conference.
Yeah, I mean, just on in terms of getting together, I mean, there are some roundtables in the States where I know that people drive from quite distances to go to meetings and things. But yeah, it's more difficult for us, if you like, to get some of the keynote speakers from the States and things like that. So although we have about 4 regular meetings in London throughout the year, and as Greg says, we not only put those on Zoom, but we also have some specific Zoom meetings as well, which has made things a little bit easier getting guest speakers. But no, one of the things we're really proud of is our conference. You probably know more about the origins of that than I do, Greg, but certainly we've been holding those ever since the sesquicentennial, pretty much annually, ever since the sesquicentennial, easy to say, back in 2011. And we have a different theme each year. We have a couple of speakers from the States each as guest speakers. And it's an opportunity for people wherever you are in the UK to come together, and as Greg says, to have that camaraderie. So what's important is not just coming for the lectures and things like that. What's more important is the discussions after the lectures, and then the breakout sessions by the coffee machine, or later on in the bar and over dinner and things like that. So we think it's a really great opportunity again for people who are interested in the Civil War to come together and talk about things, and talk about their interests, and talk about what's covered by the conference. So yeah, conference is one of the things that we're really proud of. We also do what we call a field trip. Unfortunately, there's a limited number of Civil War related things which you can go and see in Britain. So we tend to go to the continent. It tends to be a little bit more World War I, World War II focused, but we always try and build in an American theme where we can. So for example, we're going to Normandy in October. But we'll be covering not only the British side of the actions at Normandy, but we'll be doing quite a bit on the American side of the conflict as well. And we always try and build in that American theme. It's worth saying that we do get people coming from Europe. We've actually had people coming from New Zealand for our conferences. So again, we've got quite a small but dedicated following worldwide who we get coming over.
And it was really cool for me when I came over, and you talk about those discussions that happen after the talks, and I found myself talking about like World War I naval history, and the Boer Wars and the English Civil War, and like the people that came to the conference not only loved the American Civil War, but typically had 1 or 2 other areas of deep, passionate interest, which really made for a neat kind of intellectual environment to be part of. So let me ask each of you kind of what's your little special side hustle besides the U.S. Civil War, Mike?
My sort of key subject of study in the Civil War has been the effect on the British Army. But I've always been interested in European wars of the 19th century in particular. But also in First World War and the Second World War. I think again, as you rightly say, Chris, one of the things is that we've got people who are interested in a broad spectrum of military history, as well as being very, some of them are very focused on the Civil War, but also a broad spectrum. And for me, parallels are really interesting. And we talked about this a lot, as you said, after the, in the bar after the talks at conference. And we quite often find ourselves talking about parallels between the Civil War and other British conflicts or other conflicts. I mean, recently I wrote a piece for the Crossfire magazine to say, are there parallels between Civil War and the Ukraine? And there's always something that you can see where the Civil War has influenced other conflicts, I think.
How about you, Greg? Any particular side interest that fascinates you?
Well, of the Civil War itself, I quite like just diving around particular things like units, how units started out and how they ended up. Try to follow them around. But I'm more of a story person. Again, just thinking of finding things and something that people wrote and go, oh, right, that's their viewpoint of that particular battle. How did it actually pan out? And I wrote about that in the last Crossfire magazine, this sort of Dear Diary, where I had a diary extract of somebody, very matter of fact, about how he was a Confederate and his unit captured a battery at Murfreesboro. All matter of fact. But actually, it was when you read the other side, it was a bloody right knuckle dusting, fist fight, etc., etc. So that's what I'm into at the moment. But I'm fairly liberal with what I do. I'm a bookophone, and I see a book and I go, "Ooh, that's interesting. I'd like to know more about that." But outside of the Civil War, it's just a whole gambit because I live on the East Coast in Kent, and I can be in France. Well, I used to be able to be in France, within hours. Now you've got to go through sort of massive queues and customs declarations like that. But anyway, I can be on the battlefield, World War One battlefields within half a day with some chums, and that's it. That's the whole thing for me, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Wow, wow. Yeah, and I was really impressed, when I got over there and as I'm kind of diving into English history in ways that I'd never been able to experience before, and just kind of be able to, walk through the town squares and seeing the World War One memorials. That is probably the most striking thing for me is the way that you guys just do such an incredible job of remembering your war dead from World War One. And I've got a little, fascination, little side hustle with the Zulu Wars. Did not find a whole lot of Zulu War history while I was there, but it was neat to then, be around members of the roundtable and just all these great conversations and connections, and it was just so invigorating for me. Mike, let me ask you, like, what brought you to the American Civil War in the first place? What's your Civil War origin story?
Well, it's a bit strange, really, I suppose. So when I was at university, I did do some American history, so I was sort of introduced to the American Civil War at university. But as I say, people come from different points, and back in the 80s, I used to do a lot of wargaming, with model figures. And somebody in our club, we used to go into competitions, and somebody said, "Well, we're entering this competition, and we need somebody to play American Civil War." And I said, "Well, I'll have a go." And I had a go, and as I say, I just got hooked with the fact that it's such a pivotal time in military history, that the technology is changing so quickly in the latter half of the 19th century, and the tactics have to adapt to it, and the people who are fighting, both from the generals all the way down to the individual soldiers, have to adapt to that technology and those tactics. So I just think it's an extraordinarily interesting period, not just in America, but across the entire world, for military progress or otherwise, I suppose. So yeah, I came to it through wargaming, but that meant doing a whole load of reading and researching, and it's the history which has really kept with me in that sense. I don't walk in at all anymore, but the history has stuck with me.
Yeah. Greg, how about you? What's your Civil War origin story?
Well, I have a very long gestation period for the Civil War because I'm half American. I don't shout about it too much. I should do a bit more, I suppose. But my father came from Clifton Forge, Virginia, just at the top end of the Shenandoah, or the bottom end, whichever one it is. And he joined the American Air Force when he was young, came over to England. My mother's English, she got a clause into him. Long story short, they got married. I was born here, but then I spent the first 11 years in America, and we were stationed at Andrews Air Force Base in Maryland. But I was too young to appreciate battlefields. I do remember going to Harper's Ferry when I was very, very young. But then when he retired, my mum made him come back over here. So I was always interested in military history. And then it wasn't until we went back to visit some relatives that I sort of went, oh, and we went to Manassas, and I picked up the personal General Grant's memoirs, in a very readable form for a youngster. And I think that was it, to be perfectly honest. And then moving forward, I was just a lone wolf here, just reading, buying books. And then all of a sudden, I found out that there was a round table, and I joined the group in 2001. And then just going through the cycle of that. And I haven't looked back since, but it's kept me off the streets, I think, is the main thing.
Well, I know that you oh, go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, Greg's got 10 more years than me in the round table. I joined in 2011 because my wife worked for the BBC and she was doing programs about the sesquicentennial. And she said, have you heard about this thing called the American Civil War Roundtable? And I said, no. And then I discovered, as Greg says, that this thing had been going and I've been interested in Civil War, but it was the first time it had come to my attention. So it was a bit of a no-brainer for us to join at that point.
And that is what I think one of the important things is that sense of community that comes with any roundtable. But, I could see where you guys might feel especially disconnected because you're literally not on the ground in the way that some of us in America are. But, both of you got hooked into the roundtable and you've both had leadership positions during what I would consider to be challenging times. Mike, you became president during COVID, which was a big challenge. Tell me a little bit about how you navigated some of that territory.
Well, I became president in November 2019, so literally just before COVID arrived. And the very first thing that we had a conference coming up in April the following year, and I think I did a talk in February, and somebody said, well, what about this thing that's going on in China, and what happens if that starts spreading, and what are we going to do about conference? So yeah, right from the beginning, it was we need to do some sort of contingency planning and things like that. So yeah, I mean, initially it was quite worrying. How are we actually going to keep the group going? Because if you can't meet, you lose that continuity, and people start falling out, falling away. And so yeah, I think the whole Zoom and social media thing was hugely important to us. And people have been talking before that about, well, can we get, what about the people who can't easily get to London and things like that? And can we start thinking about doing video, putting these things out on video and getting people to dial in and things? But I don't think the technology had ever quite been there. And then, COVID in some ways just changed things because it made life so much easier doing things like we're doing now. Yeah. So, we took advantage of that. Greg was actually the first person who did a Zoom-based talk for us. So he was our guinea pig.
I'd forgotten about that. Yes, yeah.
And we tried it out. We tried it out initially with a couple of people internally, and the technology worked, and that was successful. And then we went from there. And as I say, what it meant is that we could get, first of all, we could get people not only because they were worried about COVID and worried about getting together socially, but also people who, people in Scotland, Northern Ireland, and places like that, who are members of our table and engaged in our table, but can't physically come to all of the meetings. We've now that COVID has subsided, we've gone back to some of our old activity, our traditional activities, but we've bolted on, the social media and the video conferencing and all of that, and I think that's been hugely successful. So we did have, prior to when I became president, we had very slow decrease in numbers, and then I think since then, because we've got a bigger online presence, because people can engage with us from a wider area, and it's not just Southeast England, we've started to see numbers going up again.
Nice.
So I think, I think that the technology has actually been quite an enabler for us, and it's been good for us.
And Greg, you had your own.
I'm just going to chip in here. I mean, it's been great for us. So Mike is very much underestimating the role that he's had in the society. There you go.
Well, and I think it's important to point out too, because I know roundtables here have struggled with the use of technology, because then people are not going to meetings because they can Zoom in, but then that sense of community that you guys have talked about being so important, that tends to dissipate when you're not getting together. And so, I think hearing a success story about how Zoom has helped you guys and how you're still maintaining that sense of community is really important, because it is something that roundtables struggle with.
Yeah, I mean, it can cut both ways, because you worry that people won't come in person because it's so easy to come in by Zoom. Do you go and watch a football match live, or do you just wait for the television? There's always that dichotomy there. But on the whole, I think making things more accessible has helped. And I think you always still get a better product if you come along in person. But you have to accept that there are some people who, for whatever reason, find it difficult coming along in person. And broadening those different ways in which people can engage, I think has been really good. We've also, I mean, you're aware with Des Rawlings, who's one of your, now, doing a lot of work with you on emerging civil war. So he's been quite good, because we've also done not only through Zoom but also through social media. So we've now got a big Facebook following. So people don't have to be full members. People can sort of dip in and associate with us through Facebook and things like that. And yeah, we'd love it if they did become full members. But we're not averse to people just watching what we do, and if they want to just come along to one meeting because that's what's interests them, hopefully, as I say, people will like the product and see what we do, and then become full members. And I think we do see that. We do get people who come along to a meeting, on Zoom or whatever, and then they say, I want to get involved with this in a bigger way.
Greg, you had a leadership stint during another really, I would say, challenging time during the sesquicentennial, where there's lots going on. Tell me a little bit about kind of how you handled that.
It was the early 2000s was quite a fairly traumatic time in the main leadership role. We had a succession of presidents who came and went, I literally remember the outgoing president at the AGM says, "Well, I'm standing down," and I was sitting next to him at the time when he was talking, but luckily Greg has volunteered to take over. And I looked up and went, "I'm not sure that I had this conversation with you." But you just have to grasp that, I was used to that sort of thing through work, and and to taking responsibility. And they always say, give a busy man a job because he'll get it done, type thing. So yeah, but I can never say that word, but the 150th celebrations, we decided to theme our conference themed each year, and we struggled a little bit. 63 was brilliant, because we just went Gettysburg, Vicksburg. So that worked. But then, 64 was a bit dull, and 65 we went, well, it sort of started and finished, didn't it? March. It was all over by April. But yeah, I mean, it was fun. And not just me, but, I think that there's been a number of people who have stepped up, added, to the ideas, but we've never had it so good where we are now with the people that are involved. Not just us two. There's a whole group of people who just say, "I'd just like to do that job." Like Darren. I'll just do that job, and I want to extend that job because I'm interested in doing it. So it's been. It was tough. It takes time and effort, as you know. And then added to the Crossfire, my Crossfire responsibilities as well. So again, that's been an ongoing tour de force, as we know.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit because we've mentioned Crossfire a couple times. It's a wonderful publication that the Roundtable does. You serve as editor-in-chief. Tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, so we found out that it's unique in the grand scheme of things. It started way back in the early days before my time as a A4 newsletter that was sent out because there was no internet. So somebody wrote something about meeting reports and then upcoming meetings. So they were just sent out, photocopied, stapled, out they go. And then somebody came up with the idea of turning it into a magazine with a small m, and that developed. And I can remember distinctly our April 2003 conference that Mike mentioned. It was in Birmingham. It was our 50th anniversary. And the president at the time organized it. And Ed Bars was there. Jeb Stuart IV was there. It was great, what I can remember of it. And then at the very end, Peter, who was the president at the time, came over and said, "Oh, is it Greg?" He said, "You've been a member for a couple of years. About time you stood up and started taking on some more responsibilities." I'm like, okay. And he said to Alec Hassanston, who's was the Crossfire editor for the last 15 years, is standing down, and we want you to do Crossfire. And I went, "Well, I'm not a writer. I'm not I don't know anything." And he said, "Oh, no, just have a go. 3 times a year. What's the problem?" Anyway, we move on, and it just grew and developed, and it is what it is now. It's not where I wanted to be completely. I wanted to be full color, but the boss won't, let me have full color. But it's too expensive. But what every year, and I say the same thing. It's not about the British involvement in the American Civil War. It's really a membership magazine, and if you want to write an article and put it in, it'll go in, because the standard is exceptionally high. It can be about anything at all, and I've learned over the years that you don't just go, "Oh, yeah, we had there was a meeting in a pub in Liverpool and it was really exciting." No, it wasn't. Okay, it's people want Gettysburg first day, and the conflict there, and I've had some super people write for me. Loads of Americans, authors have contributed. We sort of twist their arm to start with, and then suddenly they're there, and they see it as an opportunity, I think, to get their works out there. And I've just met over the years people that have come over. We've gone over there, and they like what they see. So it's been quite interesting to have to be part of Crossfire for all these years. Good days and bad days, though. Good issues and bad issues, I must admit. But there you go.
Speaking as an editor, I can say amen.
And we're extremely proud of it, and we are incredibly grateful to Greg, and incredibly proud of Greg as well for everything he does there, because it is absolutely brilliant to come out with 3 issues every year of, and yeah, okay, Greg says that some issues are better than others, but they're all brilliant, frankly. And once again, we're now looking at saying, well, postage is becoming expensive, but we can do this electronically now. A lot of people don't want to have things on paper. They like to read their stuff on their computer screens or on their iPads and things like that. So again, we can engage with people out in America, and we can just send them an electronic version of this, and it keeps our costs down, and it gets more people engaged as well. So we're always looking at ways that we can try and utilize technology to get things out there for people.
Yeah, I was going to actually commend you for the use of digital technology that way, because that's how I get my Crossfire, and that's how I read it, and that's how I first discovered it. And I'm sure there are going to be people listening who are like, "Now, how can I get a hold of a copy of that?" Is it something folks can get, or they have to sign up to be part of the roundtable?
Well, we have a select few people like yourself, Chris, who we do give free copies to, gratis copies to, and you should be a member anyway.
Right, we're going to have that conversation when we're finished, actually.
But no, I mean, it's basically go to our website, join as a member, and you will get 3 copies of Crossfire. And not only that, you'll get about 10 years back issues as well, because those are all available on our website. So that is just worth a year's membership, quite frankly. But no, as I say, we now charge exactly the same to overseas members as we do to UK members. The only difference is that if you're overseas, you'll get it electronically rather than the UK, who still do get a paper copy. Because it is quite expensive to mail copies out to the US these days.
Yeah, and just producing a magazine isn't a cheap thing to begin with, but you guys do a wonderful job. I'm a big fan, big fan.
It's worth saying that Greg was saying that before he came in, a lot it was a sort of combined newsletter magazine. We did have articles. And some very good articles, but it was also fulfilling that newsletter role. But we now have Crossfire, but we also have a newsletter which is entirely electronic. So there's also that to keep up to date with what we're doing, and also trying to keep up to date with news events and in the sort of Civil War space, across the world, really.
You guys have mentioned that your members contribute a lot of this content, and I think that kind of speaks again to that intellectual environment that you guys have, where your folks are researching, they're writing, they're working on their own projects. Tell me a little bit about some of the work that your colleagues are up to.
Mike, do you want to do that?
And I don't need a specific checklist, but I think just in general, it's kind of neat.
Yeah, let me start. I mean, there's no doubt that if you just go to a meeting and mention, very quietly, the Alabama, you'll have 4 or 5 people who are, really, really good and understand what the Alabama is all about. We have some people who are complete experts on Liverpool. We have a couple of researchers, people who are researching, and they've been trying to locate the graves of Civil War veterans that came back to England. And that's been an exciting project. It's been difficult to ask people to keep us updated so that we can share their research, because sometimes they're very protective of what they do, and sort of our sort of overview, correct me please Mike, is that you're doing this research for the purpose of what? It must be that you want to share it and do it, that type of thing. But then we've got some very interesting people, like John Murray, and he lives in the Isle of Man, and he just knows absolutely everything about Manx men in the Civil War. And he can tell you what regiment they fought in, mainly the Union, where they fought, where they died, where they're buried, where they're and the recent Crossfire's got an article on British casualties in Gettysburg. Mike Hammerson has written a regimental history. Richard O'Sullivan has written the 55th Virginia. Do you remember that old series? I can't remember the name of it now. The Greybound series.
Oh yeah, the Virginia Regimental series. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, he contributed to that, and you think, well, how on earth does a Englishman do that? Well, it's just because they do, But hats off to people like, we have a chap called Charles Priestley, who knows everything about Confederate London, and more importantly, he knows everything about France and the Civil War, and he is one of the Alabama experts, I must admit. And it's just people come into our lives and research, and off we go. And there's just a whole load of people and some ancestors who have spoken to us about it. And then, of course, we have people like Mike, who's written a book on it as well. So I'll let you talk about that, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, we've got Greg's covered a lot of the main ones there, but we've got quite a few published authors. Peter Barrett, our vice president, he's done a couple of books. He's interested in the naval side of history, so he's done a couple of books about naval personalities and warships, and particularly on the Union side in Peter's case. We get quite a few people who come to us. Some people come to us because they've written the book and they want to publicize it. Would you believe that? But mostly we sort of suck them in, and quite a few of those stay with us. Yeah. My own book, again, as I said earlier, I did a PhD a few years back now about the influence of the Civil War on the British Army. So yeah, I was one of those who sort of came along to because I was interested in doing research and interested in finding out what people could do to help me write a book. Yeah. But yeah, no, again, as you said, it's a very knowledgeable group, and there are some people who've got very niche knowledge, and there are some people who've got perhaps more mainstream knowledge. But yeah.
Now, speaking of writing a book, now you guys are working on a top secret project with ECW about England in the Civil War. Mike, tell me just a little bit about, tease us a little bit.
Yeah, so it's still in the initial stages at the moment. But the idea is to try and put something out in the ECW series which gives people a taste of how important the Civil War was to England, and how important the English involvement in the Civil War was. As I say, whether that be the political side of things, is England going to recognise the Confederacy, or Britain going to recognise the Confederacy? The role of Britain in blockade running, the role of Britain in providing munitions, and also the contribution of British people who went to fight on whichever side. And as Greg said, we've got a lot of people who have interested in trying to find the graves of those people when they came back. But also we want to try and get into do something along that emerging Civil War lines of making it something which people can relate to in the present day as well. So we want to try and say, well, if you're coming over to London, are there any Civil War sites which you might not think that there are any Civil War sites in London or in Lancashire and places like that, but are there places which we can point you to as a tourist, to say, well, if you're in London, yeah, there are Civil War aspects to that over here in Britain.
And Greg, this is a cool way to kind of showcase some of the talent you were talking about a little while ago too, right?
Absolutely, yes. So just to pick up on what Mike said, there is a Liverpool walking trail, and there is a London walking trail which has been composed, and the London one, Charles Priestley's effort, he's just continually adding to it. He says, "Oh, I found another house, or site where so and so lived, or stayed there overnight," type thing. So it's just the obsession of it. But yeah, I mean, we think this project is massively interesting, and we want to make it accessible for people within the concept of the ECW series, just to make them aware that when they come over to England, there's more to visiting than Westminster Abbey, and Canterbury Cathedral and that type of thing. They could pop around the corner, and so and so sat here, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, and in fact, when I went to Westminster Abbey myself, I'm like, oh my God, there's Abraham Lincoln in Parliament Square, and so there were just all these kind of neat little pop-up sudden experiences that I had that were really neat to make connections to. So, um, is there an aspect of the U.S. British connection in the Civil War that's particularly interesting to each of you? Um, Mike, let me start with you. Something about that connection that you're particularly interested in?
Well, as I said, my interest is in that whole question about the observers and people from Britain who from the army and to a lesser extent from the navy who went to America and what they did and what they observed. I mean, a lot of people know about Arthur Fremantle, and his diaries as probably pretty much stayed in print, I think, for probably the last 30 or 40 years. But there were so many other people who also went, and often had more influence than Fremantle. I think the whole question about the politics and the geopolitics of the Civil War is quite interesting, because up until then, I don't think America had really been taken that seriously in Europe. And then suddenly you see what America can do. If America really wants to start thinking as a world player, it can suddenly put these armies together. It can suddenly put these navies together. And I think that's a real eye opener for the European powers, and I think that's something that is really interesting to me.
And again, going back to those connections you had talked about earlier, we could make that same argument that on the eve of World War II, when America suddenly wakes up and it's like, oh wow,
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I say that the parallels with the Civil War and with other conflicts, so there's all sorts of echoes there in history.
Greg, how about you?
Yeah. Well, for my part, it's I've always been interested in the British involvement, but then I've always been a blood and guts sort of man. So I'd rather read about a battle than than a meeting somewhere that was had, and But I'm a spreadsheet guy as well, so I am fascinated by lists of shells and cartridge belts and things like that. So that gets me as well. But I think that I was really, really sparked when just out the blue, I thought about doing a lecture on Henry Hoates, who was a Confederate agent that was sent over by Judah Benjamin to do some good old-fashioned Confederate propaganda. And he produced what's called the Index, terrible name for a little magazine. But he just wined and dined British politicians in 1861 onwards to try and get them to support the South. And that whole story of him, literally a one-man band with no resources and no money, but British politicians at the time, liked the odd glass of port and a cigar, so it wasn't expensive to try and bribe them. And the Index, which is sort of like a 4-page newspaper, I forget what it's called, the very large size, and it existed all the way through. But of course, as Confederate ambitions waned in the Civil War, the support for the South died out. So that was me. That was it. And I put it together as a lecture, and as I say, I think it went down well. They didn't throw any tomatoes at me here in the group, and I was lucky enough to take it on the road in Alabama and Tennessee and Kentucky, and got away with it there as well. So yeah, that's what I liked. Yeah, it was 10 years ago. Gosh.
Jeez. As we get ready to wrap up here, let me just ask you, and Mike, you'd mentioned the commitment you need to have to come to the United States to visit these battlefields as someone who lives in the UK. Do you have a particular battlefield? Do each of you have a particular battlefield or spot that you like to visit when you're here, Mike?
I'm going to have make a dreadful admission here. I have never been to Gettysburg. I've been to the States loads of times, but I keep going to really obscure battlefields that we're the only English people probably for 100 miles, I suspect.
That's okay, though.
I really, really need to go to Gettysburg before I die.
So of the places you have visited, though, is there one that speaks to you, or
I don't know. I like the peninsula. I think the peninsula battlefields. It's that period, the 7 days. For me, that's people talk about Gettysburg and all of those being decisive, but for me, so the 7 days is decisive in the other way, because if the 7 days had gone as a Union victory, we wouldn't be talking about the Civil War in the same way as we do now. I think what ifs are always difficult, and I don't like what ifs, Chris. But the 7 days to me keeps the Confederacy going. And if it hadn't happened, would the Confederacy just have collapsed? Maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't. But anyway, it certainly would. The conflict would have been different. And for me, going to Gainesville and something like that, there's something about them which, for me, they're very emotive. They're very, very evocative. Just the terrain and thinking about how pivotal those battles were is quite emotive to me.
That's a great answer. That's a great answer. So, yeah. Greg, how about you?
Well, I was always an Eastern Theatre man. Whenever we had holidays, family holidays, and said, well, we'll go for 2 weeks, and we'll have 1 week on the battlefields, and we'll have another week sort of on the beach somewhere, which is always quite nice. I was lucky enough to do a Western theatre tour trip round, so that was great. Saw as much as I possibly could, but I always come back to Antietam, and there's a number of reasons. I mean, they got on the ball and preserved it really, really well, and you can walk around, and it's fantastic. But it's the people that you meet. I just happened to be over there in October once. And Tom Clemens said, "Oh yeah, well, where are you staying?" I went, "Oh, I haven't booked anything yet." He said, "No, that's okay. You're staying with me." And then we latched on to a tour which Ed Bars was actually doing, and I went, "Shouldn't I have to be paying for this?" And he went, "No, that's all right. You're my friend." So we followed. Well, Ed Bars as was, he just took off, and and I was younger then, so I had trouble keeping up with him. South Mountain, this was. But it's just the literally that camaraderie. I mean, last year I went there as well. Met up with Tom, Steve French from Middleburg. He's written a bit for Crossfire, and we just walked up to the sunken lane from the Union side, and they were just chit chatting all the way across. And you don't get that from books or YouTube or whatever. And it's just great, it's just beautiful. I love them all, really. I'm never disappointed, never disappointed. And the park service people, when I was there with Ian, my friend, member of the roundtable last year, it was hot. It was our last day. We were exhausted at Manassas, and we just sat under the bench. And the park at 3 o'clock, the park ranger said, "Okay, you ready for the tour?" He went, "Well, yeah, but can we just stay here and listen to you talk to us?" And she did. She just chatted to us. They'd found some bodies in the woods, and she was telling us all about that. How they exhume them and give them a proper burial type thing. So yeah, it's just that stuff. Everywhere you go, people are nice in this in this business. It's really great.
I agree. It's a wonderful, wonderful sense of camaraderie. So if people want to find out more or get involved with the roundtable, Mike, what should they do?
Well, as I say, there's various different ways. We've got a Facebook page. We've got a YouTube channel. You can look at some of our past talks on YouTube, and you get an idea for the quality of the speakers we get and the range of subjects which we get. Those of you a little bit more up to date with your technology, we've got an Instagram channel as well. And then if that grabs your attention and you're interested in finding more, come to our website. And as I say, you can sign up from anywhere in the world to become a member. And we'd welcome you wherever you are.
Wonderful. Any final thoughts either of you'd like to share?
No.
Well, I just want to say thank you for giving us this opportunity, Chris. It was great to have you over last year for the conference. And I see Emerging Civil War and the UK Roundtable as having a great future of collaboration together.
I agree. I feel like I got there, and instead of having some good English tea, I drank the Kool-Aid instead. So I'm a big fan of you guys and what you're up to, and it's just exciting to be able to work with you. So, Mike, Greg, thanks for being with us today.
Okay, no problem. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much.
I'm Chris Mackowski for the Emerging Civil War podcast. We'll see you online and on the battlefield.